Slide 27. So after the debacle of Lin Biao's departure from China and death in Mongolia, during this time, there were negotiations going on between the Chinese and the Americans to arrange a visit to China by Richard Nixon. Supposedly Lin Biao was not in favor of this, but it's hard to say whether that had any effect on the dynamic between him and Mao. In any case, the negotiations were highly secret, and the reason for this was that before they were completed, it was wise to keep them under wraps because of the extreme controversy on both sides of such an arrangement, of such a liaison. It was politically difficult in the United States because, of course, China was an old enemy. It had fought the United States in the Korean War, where 36,000 Americans lost their lives. And they were the enemy of the nationalist Chinese, an old ally of the United States, and on the Chinese side, of course, Mao had spent decades denouncing the United States as the worst enemy that China had. However, the Soviets had become a worse enemy, and so this made that deal possible. Nixon had already floated the idea on his side in an article in the prestigious journal Foreign Affairs early in the presidential campaign, and as these arrangements went forward, eventually there was an agreement reached and a surprise announcement was made in the United States and in China in less than a month before Nixon actually landed in Shanghai and went on to Beijing to see Mao. Now going on to slide 28. During Nixon's visit, the meetings with Mao were always unscheduled, and with the hindsight of history, it seems apparent now that this was not just Mao playing the hard-to-get emperor figure while allowing Zhou and Lai, the premier, to do all the handiwork in the course of the day. It appears that Mao's health was so difficult, even at this point, that there were only certain times when he felt up to actually meeting Nixon. Part of the problem was his depression over Lin Biao. Part of the problem was physical, as he was beginning to suffer from Parkinson's disease. And so the Nixon visit did come off okay, and the two sides traded not diplomatic relations, but liaison office relations. They had to find their own solution because of the political problems I just described, with the two of them having been enemies for so long, with the third party of the Taiwan regime being in the middle and complicating things on both sides, making a full rapprochement followed by full diplomatic relations much more difficult to achieve. That was finally achieved in January of 1979 when the administration of Jimmy Carter, without very much explanation, decided to agree to full diplomatic relations, cutting off full diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but not asking for anything in return for some reason that is still not very well understood. In any case, in Mao's last couple of years, his health visibly declined. I didn't put even more photographs in here. I was tempted to show the difference between the somewhat vigorous Mao of the 1972 Nixon visit and the very debilitated man in 1975 when he met Gerald Ford and when he saw his other last visitors. His ability to make decisions was slower, and no one dared move on major policy questions without his okay. It was mostly, though, his ability to be physically present, mentally present, and do work. When he was physically and mentally present, he made decisions, but those moments became fewer and more far between as he approached his last days. So in death, there was an immediate power vacuum, going on to slide 29. And the reason for this was, as I've mentioned before, Mao was the leader who had brought the Chinese Revolution all the way through, who had, in a seeming series of miracles, made the right decisions at the right times and saved the party from disaster. There were other aspects too. There was good military tactics on occasion. There was good spying on occasion. There were awful and stupid mistakes on the nationalist side on many occasions. But Mao's reputation was so solid, and the loyalty to him was so strong, partly based on the old emperor system and the worship that went along with that, that there was no challenging his decisions at all. And so when he died, the power vacuum was immense. His wife, Jiang Qing, had headed the Cultural Revolution group, as it was called, all during that awful period. And she was an extremely unpopular figure. As an actress in Shanghai in the early 1930s, she had been arrested by the Kuomintang. It was always suspected that she had told them secrets that she should not have. She led a lifestyle that was rather interesting and loose during that period. When she made her way to Yan'an, the communist stronghold, in 1936 or early 37, she had her eye on Mao very quickly. She displaced Mao's wife and eventually married the chairman herself. When she married the chairman, the Politburo was not happy with her and told Mao that they would only agree to the marriage if she agreed to stay out of politics. And that lasted until the early 1960s, when she began to make her way slowly into political affairs using cultural activities as an entree. Because she had a lot of enemies from her previous life, she went after a lot of people during the Cultural Revolution. People who were familiar with her previous life were persecuted and imprisoned and exiled, and within the country anyway. And so she did have supporters, but her problem politically was that she did not have much of a military base or a political base in the more powerful departments of the Central Committee. So Mao's death left her exposed, and within weeks, she and the people around her were arrested. The so-called Gang of Four was not necessarily a gang in form as much as they were in name, but they were put on trial fairly quickly. One of the most famous things she said when she was in the dock, which was amazingly broadcast nationwide. Hundreds of millions of people heard her say that I was Chairman Mao's dog. When he told me to bite, I bit. Which was, of course, her way of saying that she was not making the decisions that caused all the suffering during the Cultural Revolution. It was really Chairman Mao. This was probably not accidental that the regime allowed her to do this, because without actually denouncing Mao themselves, they allowed her to do so in a way that they could deny themselves, but that still exposed Mao Zedong as the chief architect of the great chaos that had befallen their country. Let's go on to slide 30. So now it was possible, with the far left out of the way, for economic change to and political change to be pursued. There were Cultural Revolution survivors. In this photograph on the bottom, you see Ye Jianying. He's one of those generals who was in that committee that considered whether or not to open up to the West. He was a Cultural Revolution survivor. Certainly Hua Guofeng, who was the Minister of Public Security before he was moved up to national level leadership, was a Cultural Revolution survivor. Deng Xiaoping, on the right, in that bottom photograph, who became China's de facto leader. People also used to call him China's paramount leader in the years afterward. In a sense, he was a Cultural Revolution survivor, but he had been deposed in 1966. He was a close associate of Zhou Enlai, the premier. He was a vice premier in charge of a number of different sectors, in charge of perhaps a dozen ministries, not as minister himself, but as their political supervisor. And he was, for many years, the most efficient and effective leader of government in China, and he was also a strong supporter of Mao. Jiang Qing hated him because he opposed everything that she stood for in radicalizing society, in pursuing extreme egalitarian measures that did not work very well in socialist planning. Deng Xiaoping was deposed in 1966. He was brought back by Mao in 1973 in a bid to try to rationalize and make more efficient government and raise production to avoid economic and social problems that come with things like not enough food, freezing in the dark, that sort of thing. And then he was deposed again in 1974. I think this was actually early 1975 by Jiang Qing again. So there was great demand for his return once Mao was gone, once Jiang Qing was gone. The man who succeeded Mao officially, named Hua Guofeng, he's in both of these photographs, quickly changed his hairstyle from the crew cut to the Mao cut, as you can see in the photograph below there. But the hairstyle was not enough to hold back the return of Deng Xiaoping. And Hua Guofeng, who became chairman of the party in October of 1976, within 2 years was still chairman of the party, but did not hold the ultimate power of government and of directing the party. Now that power belonged, in fact, if not in name, to Deng Xiaoping. Now, why is that? It's a very curious thing to us, because when on Inauguration Day, when one president steps aside and another one comes up and takes the oath of office, that's it. It's all done. Changes, it's like black and white. It's like yesterday and today. But that's not true in China. We'll get into more of why that is, but one of the reasons is that the population, especially during this time, was kept so much in the dark that it was not politically possible to just make a quick switch of the kind that we're used to in the West, that is institutionally based. It would not be good for keeping people reassured, because whenever there has been quick political change in China, it's been violent and it's been chaotic. And so in order to assure people that there will be no violence and there will be no chaos, first of all, they're kept in the dark about what's really going on. That's, anyway, the idea that people in high government have there. And second, they are reassured that changes that you want are happening slowly, but they will not happen so quickly that people will get angry and start killing each other. That's the best way I can explain it. After years of thinking about it, I'm convinced that this is at least a reasonable way to explain why people will hold office in China but will not have power, and sometimes people who do not hold office actually are pulling the puppet strings behind the scenes. That's it for this part one. I'll come back with part two to talk about Southeast Asia by Thursday, and then next week we will start to talk about the great economic change of the recovery of Japan and China's shift to authoritarian capitalism that brought it to its present stage.